I'll be reading from this passage, which is actually the character's meet cute. And I'm going to give a little bit of the setup. So Anne is an English lady. She's been living in Portugal since she's 6 years old. She came with a brother because they lost everything in England. And her brother, he came to Portugal to start selling port wine because back in the 19th century, because of the wars between England and Portugal, I'm sorry, between England and France, the drink of the hour, the drink of the really patriot Englishman was port wine. So her brother came to Portugal to sell port wine to England. And she came with him and she grew up in Portugal, and she's very whimsical and very gentle and kind, and she's all light. And she came to Portugal to she's living here, and her brother, he married a Portuguese woman, and she has a vineyard. And Anne she started living with them in the vineyard. And her sister-in-law is pregnant, and she decided to help her sister-in-law by visiting the neighboring wine properties to help them improve winemaking. So this is Anne. She just arrived at this beautiful property in the Douro Valley, and she's very hopeful, very businesslike in her mind. She thinks she's very grown up at 18, and she wants to visit this property and give impart some winemaking expertise. And then this is the setup. She knocks at the door, and I start reading from this point. Anne strolled to the front entrance and fluffed her new dress. Made of ivory satin, the bodice hugged her torso, and the overskirt opened to show layers of white too. The tiny grapes, a compliment to her embroidering skills, added just a touch to the ensemble. Satisfied, she appeared both feminine and businesslike, and reached for the brass knocker and made it resound 2 times. Several heartbeats passed. No birds chirped on the cypresses, and no insects droned over the manicured flower beds. Even the breeze had hushed. She gazed longingly at the stables and lifted her hand to knock again when the door swung outwards, missing her by an inch. In the doorway stood a grey-livered butler, his pock-marked face scrunched in a frown. He eyed her as if she was a bandit bent on invading his master's home. She forced a smile. "Hello, I'm Miss Anne." The servant grabbed her arm and pulled her inside the unlit vestibule. "Wait, what?" Barking Portuguese words she didn't understand, he steered her along a palatial foyer and hallway decorated with impressive military paintings. She had to take quick steps to avoid tripping on her skirts. When they arrived at a set of French doors adorned with blue panels, he halted. "Sir, wait if you will." Without knocking, he shoved it open and signaled impatiently for her to go inside. Anne entered gingerly, heart beating in her throat. "Espere aqui." The butler banged the door shut and left. What was wrong with him? Anne stared at the stained glass, catching her breath. The poor man must have confused her words. Either her Portuguese was not as good as she believed, or he spoke a dialect. Soon she would laugh at this over a steamy cup of tea. Anne spun in a circle, her slippers reflecting over the travertine floor. Light peeked from slits on the velvet drapery, hardly enough to satisfy her curiosity. Shadows played over the Venetian mirrors and on the gilded leaves, and rose festooning the ceiling. Opposite a grand piano loomed an assortment of guns and wicked swords. Anne touched the tip of a curved saber, and pinpricks rose along her skin. A chaise longue stood at the other corner, pillows scattered over its damask upholstery. A coffee table had liquor bottles as adornments. She brought one to her nose and grimaced at the alcohol fumes. What a shame to ill use such a superb room. Anne touched the piano keys, the notes echoing through the high ceiling, conjuring a dazzling buzz. Villanova's resident would enjoy coming here to dance. How selfish to keep it hidden. On top of an oak desk lay an ancient tome, and trailed fingers over the red and gold title, The Infinite Love of Dom Pedro and Inês de Castro. Her gaze flitted to the door, and seeing it still closed, she opened the book. Albuquerque Castle, June 1312. Inez searched the Castilian skies. Arcturus, the queen of stars and stars of queens. Her star shone mildly. It must be a sign. Had the witch not said her fate awaited in Portugal? Out in the courtyard, the mules brayed, jingled their harnesses, impatient to take her there. Just a moment more. With agile fingers, Inez braided the flowers into a fragrant bouquet. Odd numbers for luck, daffodils for truth, bluebells for health, roses for love, and the hyacinth for joy. She couldn't begin this journey without happiness. Before the tale swept her away, Anne stopped reading. The romance was another oddity. This property must be the richest in the region and by far the most desolate. Who lived here? The question gnawed at her insides, spurring her to explore further. She paused before a life-sized painting of an officer wearing the marshal's uniform. His face was vaguely familiar, with a severe mustache and white hair. What if war had left him deformed? That's why this neighbor would not socialize and allowed his vineyards to die. Anne could help. Why not bring him into their society? A breath of light would soften the heart of a weary soul. A draught lifted the hairs on Anne's neck, and the top of her ears pricked. The butter must have upset her nerves. Brushing the exposed skin of her arms, Anne turned. On the darkest side of the room, hunkering in a throne-like chair, features concealed by shadows, was a man. Had he been there all the time? Anne thanked her bonnet for concealing the fierce heat that coursed through her face. How would she convince him to rebuild his vineyards after he caught her snooping? He rose, and unfolding his lean, tall frame graciously. Anne waited for him to speak, to introduce himself, her heart battering against her ribs. He crossed the ballroom with purpose and force, the gait of one who commanded all with a wave of his gloved hands. Anne's gaze was drawn to his unfashionably long hair, the burnished gold strands reaching his shoulders. He wore it tied at the neck in the style of a noble from France's first empire. He stood before her. His expression could be carved from marble, so little feeling it showed. Was he displeased? Anne inhaled to speak, but his eyes scrambled her apology. Their irises nuanced from tawny to yellow, like a kaleidoscope made of shattered topaz. He tilted his head, and the aloofness vanished, replaced by a sardonic smile that caused her cheeks to burn. Anne hid her gaze behind her eyelids, and if there were a hole in the floor, she would hide her head too. He wasn't an old general, and he most certainly wasn't deformed. I can explain, the girl said, wringing her little hands. Pedro blinked several times, but he had not invoked the image. An apparition in clouded dress stood in the middle of his hangover. Mayhap the port had made him delirious. Light from the stained glass danced on her gauzy skirts. A wide-brimmed bonnet covered her head and face. Still, her swan-like neck, dainty shoulders, and trim back offered tantalizing glimpses of her curves. Nothing like the jaded horse the madam had sent last time. This must be his brother's doing. Still, Pedro hadn't had a woman since Carmen, and his body decided it was done with celibacy. Pedro circled her. We smelled my liquor. You test my blades. You read my book. Care to try the couch? See if it's soft? He might be wrong, with the veil covering her face, but he could bet her cheeks had turned a pretty shade of pink. Her lace-covered fingers traced the grapes embroidered in the bodice furiously. Was she nervous? But he had barely begun. What was her game? To pretend innocence. Intrigued, Pedro took a step closer. With a sharp intake of breath, she stilled. I shouldn't have touched your things. I came to. I know why you came, Pedro whispered in her ear. Her fragrance was layered, like a delicate white wine. What did she look like beneath the tulle veil? Would the illusion of innocence keep after he removed the bonnet? With a swift gesture, he unlaced the bow under her chin and flicked the head away. Her hair cascaded down her back and flirted with her hips, the unusual champagne strands curling enticingly. Please, this isn't proper. She crossed her arms over her chest as if he had barred her closest, a flush rising on her pearly skin. Her face, blue, innocent eyes, and rose lips. Only a beauty mark above the left corner of her lip added a mischievous note to her celestial countenance. Loveliness such as hers belonged in a Raphael painting, peeking at humanity from a lofty pastel cloud. What the devil should he do with an angel? She shouldn't have sent you here. Didn't she tell you what I do with breakable girls? She laughed nervously and reached for her discarded bonnet, her hand shaking. Why, I'm not made of porcelain or crystal. I'm quite strong. And did I? Then why did you tremble? Pedro caressed her cheek, feeling the downy hairs rise to meet his fingertips. She replaced the hat, her fingers fumbling with the ribbons. I will assure you, sir, I came here for a business reason, and I'm perfectly indifferent. Pedro caught the offending object and flung it away. Business indeed. She thought this was a transaction, didn't she? It was the only sensible notion the girl had spouted since she stepped into his life. While she watched him with widened eyes, Pedro brushed his thumb over the naked skin above her glove. She stopped speaking, and the tip of her tongue came out to lick her bottom lip. She wasn't indifferent to him. Why the knowledge mattered when he was paying, he could not say, only that it did. A vision flashed of her touching him, trailing her delicate fingers over his arms, and he released her hand. Are you new to this? Yes, I've just started. Say no more. Pedro silenced her with a fingertip over her mouth. He would not touch an angelic whore new to the trade. He would not trace her running brows and would not relieve her of the tight corset. He would not tie her hands and bend her over the piano. He would not release her champagne hair and see it reflected over the lacquered surface while he pounded his lust on her until she screamed. Who was he fooling? The screaming would start before he brought her to release, most likely when he showed her the ropes. Look at me. Pedro lifted her chin. She obeyed, and her eyelashes unveiled the bluest irises he ever navigated. The depths swirled with emotion, and he got lost in the ocean of her eyes. To hell with good intentions. Pedro cradled her face, his light leather-gloved palms engulfing her cheeks. The girl clamped her eyelids shut. He came closer, their breath mingling. Kissing Horace wasn't part of his transactions, but her impossibly soft lips lured him. He paused for a second, and then tipped her head and joined their lips. Warmth flooded his body, the sounds and sights of his scenes receding, leaving only roses and tea, silky strands of hair against his skin, and the pounding of his heart. Pedro broke the kiss. The pull was dangerous. It took him several seconds to still his breathing and push her away from him. Run, little angel. Fly back to whatever cloud you came from and don't come back. Be thankful I'm not in the mood to give chase.